Hey, um, so I thought I would, uh, after being in prayer about this, make another one and continue making these. Not really sure why I'm being led in this way, but that's what we'll do. Um, I thought we would continue um, with um, some of these scientific things we were talking about. So let's start with um, Isaiah. If you will go to Isaiah 40 and verse 22. Now, Isaiah is a prophetic book, and another video we may talk about many of the prophetic things that do come to pass. It's full of them in Isaiah, but Isaiah was probably written sometime in the 8th century BC. Well, if we go to Isaiah 40:22, just sticking to these science things, the fact that Earth is a circle or spherical is alluded to, and there are two really good things in this verse. Two really great little nuggets, we'll call them, that later would come to be known as true, although at the time it was written they would seem strange. It says, is it he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. So, earlier on in this chapter, for several verses, it's been talking about God, but he tells them, "Behold your God," and then starts describing many aspects of God. There are lots of things packed in this, but getting down to 22, it's describing God still, and it says, "It is He who sits above the circle of the earth." He's outside of Earth, looking at a circular Earth from above it. And as we talked about in that first video, I mean, that's not something that would have been known, similar to some of the things we were talking about in Psalms. When David was writing them, this is not something that would be known to Isaiah, or at least one wouldn't think would be known to someone living in Isaiah's day, that the earth is spherical. But even an even deeper astronomical phenomenon is mentioned here that one would not think someone living in the 8th century BC would know this. And this that I'm about to talk about is referenced. I think this is just a good clear reference, but there are many others like this. I think Job chapter 9. There's a bunch in different Psalms. I think maybe also Zechariah chapter 12. There are lots of references to this, but this is just a good, clear reference to it. It's clearly talking about God stretching out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. Well, until very recently, at least relatively speaking, early 19th century, no one thought the universe really as a whole, was expanding. The universe was thought to be, in most theories, fairly stable. Um, but it was theorized, I believe, for the first time in the 1920s, and later observations have confirmed this, that every galaxy in the universe is moving away. That's the first thing. But not only is it moving, it's moving away from every other galaxy in every direction. So it's not like things are shifting one way, they're actually stretching out in many directions. The universe is expanding, kind of like blowing up a balloon, where it's not just that the balloon is moving, the entire surface of the balloon is stretching away from every other point on the balloon as you continue to put air into it. So in the same way, the heavens are being stretched out continually. Talking about the circle of the earth, if we'll go to Job, which I know we talked about a few things in Job last time, but if we'll go back to Job 26, and I'm not quoting exactly in a lot of these. I recommend you go read it yourself if you want. I'm kind of paraphrasing just for this audience, but he has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. I believe I may have misspoke. I think in my first video, I said I was kind of impromptu, didn't have this with me, and that was just from memory. I was saying something like, I think maybe 4,000 years ago. That's probably, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. That's closer to their age. Job is newer than that. It's still a very old book of the Old Testament, but it's not that old. It's probably somewhere between 2000 BC and maybe 7th century BC, so somewhere in that range, depending on who you ask, but solidly in that range. Anyway, Job 26:10, he has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness, clearly pointing to the fact that the earth is round and that you can see where night changes to day, and that is a circle. If you look at this now from like Google Earth or something like that, you can see that division and how it moves across the waters or the oceans, and it's called the Terminator line. I don't know why they chose that word. It sounds kind of ominous, but it's a perfect circle because Earth is spherical. So that boundary line, as the Earth spins on its axis, is a perfect circle inscribed around Earth, where night changes to day. And anyone standing at that boundary, instead of observing it from space, it may not look like a clear line to them like it does from space, but they would see either a sunrise or a sunset as the Earth moves either into that dark side of the Terminator line or back into the light side of it. But that's what someone observing it there would see. And around this section, if we'll stay in this same chapter, there are a lot of good other little things like this. He stretches out the north, starting at verse 7. He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing, similar to that passage we talked about in Psalms. So the earth is just being suspended in a void, and it's being hung on nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not split open under them. I can't remember the exact weight. I know I've looked this up before, but we know now it doesn't look like that, someone observing it. But it is kind of incredible now knowing the weight of how much water is in a typical storm cloud. I mean, it's millions of pounds, I believe. But someone can check me on that. Go look that up. I do know it is an immense. Water's 8 or so pounds a gallon. It is an immense amount of moisture and weight just being held up in this cloud. And it is kind of incredible to think about that under all that weight, it doesn't just split open. But due to the way water vapor works and how it's able to be suspended in air as long as it's not past a breaking saturation point, as long as the humidity's under the correct level for that dew point, it just hangs there. Really incredible stuff. If we'll stay in Job, but move to that section we were talking about in the last video, where for several chapters it says, depending on the section, sometimes it says Yahweh is questioning Job, sometimes it refers to Elohim. But if we'll go to chapter 38, I believe, and skip down to verse 31. So as an observer of the sky, I've been watching the sky. I'm not going to say my age, but I've been around a while. And it doesn't really seem to change that much. Looking at these, what I'm about to reference, these specific constellations. Well, they're not full constellations, but systems. From night to night, they seem the same. They don't seem to really change. But in this kind of cross-examination of just grilling Job, if you're going to dare question me, I'm going to question you. You're going to tell me the answer to these things. And he says to Job, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? So something you should know about those systems, Pleiades have several stars in them, I think 7, but there's a set in the middle of that system that are kind of bound together in an eternal dance. Well, not truly eternal. I guess eventually this will stop, but at least relatively speaking, for our observable purposes, they are bound together in this dance at kind of the same distance, just stuck from each other, spinning around each other, and they're just held there by their own gravity. So they're bound together. He says to Job, can you bind the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? And interestingly enough, the 3, and I think some versions might say the cords of Orion, but it's clearly talking about Orion's belt. That set of 3 stars is constantly moving away from each other, not in a hugely perceptible amount just looking at it, but observing it, with a telescope and making these calculations. You see that they're slowly deteriorating, the amount of gravity holding them together and how far apart they are. They're slowly moving away from each other, kind of like continental drift. They're just It's not something you could really stand at the edge of the Atlantic and watch North America move away from Europe. But measuring it over time, you know for sure that it is happening. They are, that belt of Orion is becoming loosened. Um, Another thing we'll talk about, I guess, you get to a principle in consulting different books, um, that, at least in my opinion, y'all may disagree with me on this, but that the law of thermodynamics, at least the one, I think it's second law, but the one that is, no mass or energy is created, at this point, at least from what we can observe. The amount seems to stay constant. If you look at John 1:3, all things were made through him, and without him wasn't anything made that was made. That verse that you're probably familiar with. You look at that, and in consultation, all things were made through him. Without him was not anything made that was made. And compare that, or couple it with Genesis 2:2. On that day, the seventh day, Elohim rest, and their creative work is done. You couple these passages with Hebrews 1:3. Flip over there. Hebrews 1:3 says, and just in part, the part we're worried about for this purpose, he upholds the universe by the word of his power, and can couple that as well with Colossians 1:17. In him all things hold together, or in some versions subsist. So combine those together, and we get an expression of these same principles, that they made all things, they're no longer making things, and they subsist. They continue to be here as long as their word commands it. So since they're commanding that time still exists at this point, you get that same principle, that no mass or energy can be created or destroyed. It can change forms, but the level of energy and mass in the entire universe is constant. Might be shifting. It might be moving from a more organized state to a more disorganized state. In general, entropy is acting upon it, but the same amount of it remains. And I guess talking about that law, we really should talk about the fact that the Bible references there are certain ordinances, law of physics and chemistry. It doesn't put it in those terms, but that's how we can deduce that that's what it's talking about. In one of those sections where Elohim is kind of grilling Job, cross-examining him and asking him questions, since he and his family and friends had the audacity to question the Creator. Their Creator then begins questioning Job, and one section He says, uh, can you know the ordinances of the heavens? And then if we look at Jeremiah 33:25, another reference to this type of thing anyway. We look at 33, flip over to 25. Thus says the Lord, if I have not established my covenant with day and night, and the fixed order of heaven and earth, then I will reject the offspring of Jacob and David. That's just a promise he's making to Jeremiah. That's not really something we need to go into to finish that sentence for our context, but it's God is covenanting by this. Oh, he's saying, if I had not done this, then I'll reject it. And since it's really like a literary device almost, it's like, of course this happened, like it might be if I said something like, I'll do this, or my name's not Jacob. It's the same kind of thing. It's, I will do this with you, this covenant I've made with you, or I did not establish my covenant with day and night and the fixed order of the heavens and earth. So there are fixed laws and ordinances, and that's something we get from that. You compare that to Isaiah 40:26. Stars appear at the proper time and place is an inference that we get from that verse. I'd encourage you to go read it yourself. But there are set rules. This is kind of along that line, although we could get some other interesting scientific inferences from this, as well as what it stands for on its own. But if we look at, I believe, Genesis 1:14, let there be lights in the expanse of heavens to separate the day from night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. You can't count on something as to be for signs or for seasons. You can't rely on it to convey that kind of information for you unless you can count on the fact that it will consistently obey a strict set of rules and move and perform in an expected manner. So unless those follow those kind of rules, then they can't be counted on for signs and for seasons. And we could compare that with Psalm 19. Oh, where is that? Psalm 19. 1 and 2. And we get another, well, I'll move into that in a moment, but Psalms 19, 1 and 2. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, whose voice is not heard. We can't hear what stars say to us. They're in a vacuum in space. But their behavior, the way the orbits they follow, way they move in the sky, the way galactic systems interact with each other. These are all according to a set of rules, and they behave in a predictable way. We go on down in this. We find that the sun, this isn't as clear as it is in some other places, but travels in a set path, which at first, when we first started learning about our solar system, that seemed strange because we're like, well, it doesn't really move. Our solar system is heliocentric, meaning it moves around the sun. But later, as we would come to know more about astronomy, it actually, our solar system is moving in a route in the Milky Way galaxy. The law of the Lord is perfect. The testimony of the Lord is sure. The precepts of the Lord are right. The commandment of the Lord is pure. These firm dictates are consistent. These statutes are trustworthy, and they will continue to be. The rules for how he set things up will continue to be that way. So, I guess moving on to more of these similar subject, we'll look at Hebrews 11:3. By faith we understand the worlds are formed by the word of God, so that things are made of things that are not visible. Now, some people might say that really is just talking about who we believe the universe was spoken into existence and it just exists. It was made by the invisible word of God, which is a fair interpretation, but I think there's also a reasonable explanation of that. Now that we know a reasonable interpretation of that is, on top of that, things really are made of things that are not visible. All matter subsists of smaller particles, atoms and the like. Even atoms have subparts that are made of things that aren't visible. And even the subparts of atoms now, the more we learn, the farther we go into scientific discovery, the more we realize it seems to just go down and down and down. Things, once you get to a new level of a thing, that thing is made of something that's not visible. Parts of atoms, are made of quarks and the like. So things continue to, as you go down, be made of something smaller that's not visible. And it's like that at every scale. If you go out to the system of galaxies, inside a galaxy, as you zoom in, from the level you're looking at, there are things that aren't visible, but then you see there are, star systems in that galaxy, and then you zoom in and look at that star system, there are planets in that galaxy, or in that star system in the galaxy, and so forth. It just zoom into a subatomic level. We look at Jonah 2:6, Jonah talking about being in the deep, and we talked about that being a reference to the ocean when we talked about it in Job. Until very recently, the ocean in these places that I'm about to talk about are super high pressure, super dark. But Jonah says there are mountains in the ocean. That's not something we realized until very recently. But he says he saw went to where the moorings of those mountains are in the bottom of the deep. If we'll look at, I believe it's Leviticus 17, many verses in that, but we get the a general idea from a few verses in that are kind of repeating it. They repeat it clearly in different ways, but the idea that life is in the blood and the sustaining force of all flesh is in its blood. And to most ancient writers, that would have, like many of these ideas we've talked about, would have been a strange idea. What do you mean? They thought certain organs, we knew very little about anatomy, but that was, what sustained you, and to an extent it does, but really, blood is the life force of all flesh. It carries all of the necessary nutrients, and it carries all of the toxins that your body removes, and it carries these things where they're needed to different organ systems in your body. So it really is kind of the central thing that's needed. If we look at Genesis 1, the first few verses, we see that the three things we now know of in scientific theories, this wouldn't have been known at first, but we see a couple things in this. One, we kind of talked about this in another video, but until entropy is discovered and some of these other things, the background radiation echo in the 1900s, for pretty much all of history, science has kind of thought that the universe was eternal, and most other creation stories sometimes kind of they don't address this, or don't so clearly state that it's not, that it had a very clear beginning. And I'm not saying that that's true of all, but many creation stories fail to address that. This very boldly and clearly states, and from a very ancient time when Genesis was first written, with little information, at least we would think, have little information. And it's not obvious looking at the universe that it would have to have a beginning. As vast as it is, you might be led to believe that it's not created and that it's always existed. But now, from what we know about entropy, from a rational point of view, it can't have always existed, just based on the fact that it does exist. So the fact that it does exist and the state that it exists in is winding down to less and less energy. Just like you wouldn't walk up on a flashlight on the sidewalk and think, oh, this flashlight that you still see on has always had energy in it and always had a battery, because the fact that you find it and it's still on, but it's winding down, means that at some point someone dropped it and turned it on. That's logically the and that's the conclusion that physicists come to now, that the universe has a beginning. It started and began to expand rapidly. So anyway, it says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So unlike in some creation stories, the deity that's being talked about in that creation story is kind of existing in an already existent place. But no, it's very clear that all of the heavens and earth were created by Elohim alone. that they are a created work. The heavens and the earth are a created work. The universe is a creation. It did not exist. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So in this we also see the three essential things that define the universe are made all together. That in this first day, if we'll go on, and God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning in the first day. So we see that at the beginning, there's nothing. It tells us that it was void. But Elohim creates the heavens. So we have space now, and the earth. Matter is created. And time starts. There's a beginning. So we have the elements we need mostly. We have the space for a universe to exist in. It's made. Matter is made. Time becomes a thing. It begins. And light, energy is created. So what the universe is, space with energy and mass moving back and forth between different forms, between the two of them, all coming into existence. Pretty wild. This one's always been kind of interesting to me. This gets into some end time stuff, but also a scientific principle is espoused very clearly in it. When you think about it logically, it may have seemed to Luke when he was writing his gospel to be kind of a strange thing that we're going to talk about, because it's, if you just lived in a certain area and don't know about the shape of the earth, it seems kind of strange, because you might think, as one I think would logically conclude with this limited information, it's either night or it's day. But as we know now in modern times, it's both. It is always both. So the Bible tells us that we won't know when the Lord comes back. But it says, starting at verse 34, I tell you in that night, talking about when he does come back, because earlier it says, so will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away, and likewise let one who is in the field not turn back. But let's skip down to where we were talking about. I tell you, in that night there will be two in one bed. One will be taken and the other left. So it's not time. It tells us straight up, on that night, one or two will be in bed. One will be taken and the other left. There'll be two women grinding together. So this is like a work shift during the day. One will be taken and the other left. And you know, it talks about similar in the other synoptic gospels. One in the field, or two in the field, one taken, one left. But clearly, at the time that this happens, night and day both exist on earth simultaneously, because this is one event. He just comes back. He's revealed, and it is both night and it is both day. And to Luke and people that lived in the lifetime of Luke, that was probably a strange idea, that both things might be on earth at the same time, that it could be night and day simultaneously. But we know that that's exactly how it is. If we'll look at Psalms 8:8, this one is a really interesting one to me, because the reason we know that this psalm is scientifically accurate is because the person who read it, that the scientist that reads it anyway, the oceanographer that reads it and comes to teach us about this, used to read this verse, was Matthew Maury. He used to read this verse and be confused about it. He's like, well, if David wrote about it in the Psalms, it has to be a thing, but what could it possibly be talking about? This was in the 1800s. It says, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. It's like, what does that mean? Paths of the seas. So he spent years of his life trying to figure this out. And he is who finally discovered, and how we came to know, that there are actual paths. There are sea currents that the oceans follow, and that those currents move. And as described there, animals do use them in migratory patterns, because it makes it easier, speeds things along. And we now use them in the development of what shipping lanes to follow, which has significantly reduced the amount of time it takes to travel the ocean and the amount of fuel that one needs to expend. This isn't really exactly, I would say, a science thing, but the next thing, a more prophetic thing, I guess. And some of you, I know at times I may have had doubts about whether or not this happened. Maybe we can make a video about that at one point or another, but I think there are lots of things in the fossil record that now support this, that the longer I've thought about it, I used to be confused myself. But 2 Peter chapter 3, starting at verse, verse 5. For they deliberately overlooked this fact, that the heavens existed. That the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of the water and through water by the word of God, and that by means of these the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. But by the same word, the heavens and earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment. So it's talking about the fact that despite evidence, the fact that the earth was ever flooded would come to be ignored. Predicts that would happen, and that is what's happened. Most people do not believe in a literal flood of Noah. Genesis 1, 9, and 10 teach that when land is formed, it's formed into one continent, one mass, that the oceans and land are separated. And that may have seemed strange at the time that was written, or even to later folks who continue to reference it. It may have seemed strange to them when other books of the Bible were written and continue to reference it, because we know there are oceans separating multiple continents. But now, because of the study of plate tectonics and the like, we understand that indeed, at one time, all land on earth was one single mass. Some people may disagree with me that this hints at this, and that's fine, but I now believe that Psalms 139. Let's flip over to that because this is kind of a long section. Don't want to just paraphrase like I have with some of these. It's a little bit longer, but 139, starting at verse 13. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. Let's think about that last part. This whole thing it's been talking about being formed in secret, and your frame didn't yet exist in its true form, but nevertheless your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. I think that is an allusion. At first blush, it's to two things. First blush, to the fact that Elohim has laid out for all of us a set number of days that we are to be here, and for all of us, whether it's just a couple or whether it's thousands of them, that's still short. Life, no matter what, is like a vapor, and you have a limited amount of time to serve Elohim here on earth. But also an allusion to the fact that all of the parts of your frame in your unformed substance, it's written what they will be, every one of those parts. An allusion to what we now know about DNA. I don't want to go into as much detail because I went longer than I meant about some of the rest of these, but I would encourage you to go look them up yourself. But I will mention them quickly. I think Ecclesiastes 1 verse 7, again that's Ecclesiastes 1 verse 7, and Job 36 verse 27 and 28 clearly describe the water cycle as we know it today. Ecclesiastes and Job both are pretty old books, and at the time they were written, that would have been a very strange thing for them to say. I'm sure that would have subjected them to ridicule. That water is taken up at one place on earth from the deep, and it ascends into the clouds and these storehouses in the heavens, and goes back to where the rivers begin, and it comes down as rain, and then the rivers continually run into the ocean, yet it is never filled up. It stays at the boundary that has been drawn for it, and this happens over and over and over, clearly describing the water cycle, in my opinion. Isaiah 45:18 I think does a good job at talking about I can't think of the name of this. It's like the anthropogenesis. Anyway, some Latin word like that. Talking about, it appears at least the universe is so fine-tuned that it could have been made, it's made perfectly for man to exist, from how far away Earth is from the sun, from how strong gravity is, from like weak nuclear force to strong nuclear force, all the way up to the size of the moon and how far away it is from us, existing for tides, all the way out to the size of galactic systems. So many different things. You can go look this up yourself. It's pretty compelling to me, and it always has been the more I've dug into it, and the more and more I understand about how complicated life is, and really how fragile it is, and how fine-tuned all of these things are. And they seem made just for life to exist. And the odds of all of these things being fine-tuned to the amount they are is just statistically unimaginable, the odds that we're talking about. But it says in Isaiah 45:18, says the Lord who created, that he did not create the earth and the heavens in vain, but formed them to be inhabited. This one may or may not be compelling to y'all, don't know, but in many places, I could have cited this from, but one is Genesis 17:12, a command to do circumcision on the 8th day, and we now know that the clotting chemical prothrombin peaks on average in a newborn on the 8th day. Pretty interesting. Air has weight, as we now know, under modern studies of gases and fluids. It has a weight, and Job 28:25 says he has established a weight for the wind. Ecclesiastes 1:6 talks about the jet stream traveling in a circuit, in my opinion. Job 38:35, Elohim questioning Job, says, "Can you send out lightning that they may go and say to you, here we are," when it gets there? We now know that electromagnetic waves can in fact be harnessed to transmit information and commanded in that way. The stars of heaven appear to be pretty uniform and similar in nature to us, just looking at the night sky. But 1 Corinthians 15:41 boldly declares, "For one star differs from another in glory." These are some scientific things. There are a lot more. Like I said, hundreds of these I've been shown over the years, and I'd like to continue making these. I do want to delve a little bit into some historical things that have been helpful for me, and eventually some prophecy things, and hopefully we can make some more videos about that. But some quick historical things that are compelling to me. There are 50 persons in the Old Testament and 30 in the New Testament written about outside of the Bible. It might be hard for you to find some other historical writing that's been compiled by so many different authors over such a wide span of time, and in such different geographic areas, and especially if you're to be fair to find something that has so many ancient writers to be referenced about outside of this book. 50, like I said, in the Old Testament and 30 in the New Testament, written out outside of this book in other writings of their contemporaries, in historical writings, not usually by religious writings, referenced specifically. As an example, Jesus, Yeshua Unratzi, Jesus of Nazareth. Can't talk today. Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua Unratzi. He is written about, just a lowly carpenter, 40 by at least 40 different persons. No, not specific writing. So if the same person writes 30 books, we're not going to count them multiple times. By 40 different persons who write about Jesus outside of the New Testament. And we're not talking about somebody, excluding things in centuries after. We're talking about close in time, contemporary writings. For example, um, the Roman historian uh, Flavius Josephus, that's who we'll talk about first. But there are a lot, Pliny the Elder, I believe is one. There's a bunch I learned about in school and have continued to research as I've gotten older. But Josephus, who's a Roman historian, we're not talking about a religious man or a Christian. He's just documenting uh, for history things that were going on during that time. And he writes of John, who was called the Baptist. Herod feared his influence because of his suspicious temper that Herod was known for. So he sent John to the castle Marcurius to be killed. Josephus writes of Jesus, among other things. This is one passage. He writes, "There was a wise man, Jesus, known to be virtuous. Many Jews, but curiously other nations, became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified, but those of his disciples did not abandon discipleship. They reported he was alive and appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion." Um, and lots of examples of these types of things. Like I said, I'd like to do more. But just one more quick example. Those were some New Testament ones we gave of historical records confirming things claimed in those writings. Of two Old Testament writings, 2 Kings 24 and Daniel 1, both claim that Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, came against Jerusalem and took it, and thousands of Jews back to Iraq with him, or what is now Iraq. It was not at the time. That happened around the year 597 BC. And outside of the Old Testament, these, of course, believed, most of these writers anyway, the Babylonian religion of their region, but the hundreds of clay tablets in the historical record of Babylon confirm that that claim is correct. Nebuchadnezzar did capture Jerusalem, as those books claim, and he did take back to Babylon, to modern day Iraq, take back thousands of slaves with him. So I hope this continues to be a blessing to you. I don't really know why the Spirit has directed in this way. I didn't really anticipate putting things out like this on such a public forum, but I feel like I've been being led in this way. So if y'all who have found this, who are actually believers, could be in prayer about this work, and be in prayer for me. And if you're not a believer, I do appreciate your listening to this and searching for truth together with us. I hope that this will spark some kind of curiosity in you, and you will really dig into some of the things in His Word on your own, and not just really take some of these things that the world and others have claimed about it at face value, but actually dig into some of their claims for yourself. So I hope this is a blessing to y'all, and I appreciate your time and attention.